by the time we got into the room, they had already started the process. So when we had walked in, it's just, we're watching the machines and whatnot. And I walked in and, I'm a spiritual person, and I was like, okay, I get to kind of have a little ritual with her, this like closing ceremony, if you want to say. And I walked in and it was my friend was there, my mom was there, and we were holding hands, and I just started this prayer, and I literally started laughing. I started laughing in this most irreverent, right? This place that you're
Mhm.
supposed to be reverent, right? I started laughing and I was like, sis, you don't need any of this, huh?
Welcome to the Holistic Life Navigation Podcast, where we explore life through the lens of somatics. I'm Luis Mujica, a somatic educator who teaches people how to find safety in themselves. Your turn to learn begins now. I'm here with Stefanie Joseph. Welcome to the podcast, finally, my friend.
Thank you, Luis. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, it's fun to have you in this seat because you've been in different spaces over the years, so I've gotten to see so much of your process. And I think I wanted to start by bringing the audience back to the moment where you came into my little world and you took my 6-week course. And, in the midst of the course, something really powerful happened in your life, which eventually spawned, so many things, but also this work you do in the world now. So I just want to start with take us back, like tell us about the situation as much as you want to share.
Yeah, it's interesting because as soon as you started talking, my body's like, oh, we're going there. We're going there.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt it um, it's not a topic that I'll share it with everybody, anybody. So I was introduced to your work in December of 2021, talking with a new friend online, and she introduced me to the concept of fawning. And I'm like, what's that? And she goes, listen to this episode. And now it's like the gateway. It's what I share to everybody. But I listened to this.
It's the gateway drug to HLN.
It is. It really was. It is. And I listened to it and I'm like, what the hell is this?
Mm,
If, and like all these thoughts of like, if I'm not fawning, who am I? And,
hmm
everything just kind of spiraled. And it happened to be right before you were getting ready to launch a new 6-week program. And she's like, check this out. And of course I did. And I'm really big at listening to my body. At the time, I didn't call it that, but it was like my sacral and, listening to my intuition. And
hmm
when I started following you after listening to that podcast episode, I'm like, oh, there's something here. Like it's
hmm
that soul, that remembrance, right? That
hmm
cellular remembrance of this is part of my journey. And so I started your 6-week program. It was the beginning of 2022. I think it was around February, Marchish. And I was new to somatics. I had, like you hear about it. It's kind of, that buzzword. And at that time, it was really starting to get into my awareness a little bit more. I came in from more the spiritual, mystical space. And I, it was just like I was this new student of, oh my gosh, like I can learn
hmm
all of these pieces of me. So trudging through it, or going, I remember even the, nutrition and all of that. And then we ended, I think it was like one of the last classes that we had. So we were leading into May and June. And well, actually, let me backtrack a little bit. So while we were in the class, I ended up losing my job in the
hmm
first part of May,
I think I
which
knew
was
that.
yeah, it was really fascinating because the first time I used somatics to process a traumatic event. I've been with the company for 15 years
hmm
and kind of knew that there was things happening, but I was always like, I'm safe. I'm kind of like the senior, one of the senior people there. And so I ended up going in on a Monday morning, and my boss is like, we have to go for a walk. And I remember looking at him and said, oh, that walk. And he just looked at
mm
me and he's like, yeah. So I sat there and I was like, okay, what's going on? And I felt it. So that plays into the big event that happened. So just kind of
Well, I want to pause there.
yeah.
How'd you navigate that?
Ooh.
Like, what happened? Like losing your job midway through the course. What happened for you?
Yeah, so I remember sitting at the table with, the HR and all of the people were talking, and I started feeling numb. Like I sat there and I was just watching them and just staring at them, like almost like I'm not here.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I'm okay. And so I the meeting was super quick, and we got through it, and I kind of had I was not surprised in that I'd been doing my own stuff on the side. I'd been in that space of like preparing myself that when it felt time. But I just remember like taking that moment of feeling the numbness and then being like, wait a minute, no, we're learning to do things a little bit differently,
Hmm.
right? And because I've learned over these last 6 months that my go-to, I disassociate and I like
Hmm.
want to step out of my body.
Yeah.
But I was like, no, I'm actually going to be there and I'm going to sit with it. And went out to the car. I remember calling my husband and saying, this is happening. And he said, we'll get through this. And I'm like, I know that. And it was a moment of like just literally processing through. It, it's interesting because I haven't actually explained like the somatic part of processing that because it was this inner knowing that this was a right step for me, but that I didn't run away from the feelings of like, I'm totally rejected right now. Like,
Hmm.
I remember feeling completely rejected. And for the next couple weeks of just being like, they don't want me there.
Hmm.
They don't want me there. And then also having this weekly class that I get to go sit in and be with you and the other people that are processing life.
With those feelings of what's coming up in you, and you get
Yeah.
put them through the practices that I'm teaching.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And did it help you move through it, or did you feel pretty stuck in that?
I was still in the space of like learning and I got caught up a lot on the language,
Hmm.
right? That
Because
like
it
here,
was so new for you. Yeah.
yeah. And so this language of, like, feeling, and I'm a good student. I will show up to class, I will listen, I will do all my homework, I will pay attention. But I remember getting caught up on the language at that time. So
Hmm.
it was, okay, I have this awareness of my body. I want to numb. I, but I'm gonna just be with it. But I do
Hmm.
remember getting caught up on the language
Hmm.
at that
Hmm.
time.
And I just want to freeze that frame because that's what, almost 3 years ago. How do you relate to your numbness now in a way that you didn't relate to it then before you had the tools? What's that like when it comes in?
Mm. Literally, like just the relating piece has been the
Hmm.
biggest part for me of honoring that numbness in itself is a sensation.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that when I start feeling that numbness, it's my body's cue of like, wait, there's actually something here for you to be feeling rather
Yeah.
than just saying like, we'll just put that into the bucket of stuff that we don't want to feel.
Yeah, and just for those of you listening, numbness is really the body's way of giving you a break from
Mm.
perceiving all the charge and information and emotion that's there that you don't have capacity to be with in that moment. So it's a protective mechanism. It gives you a little pause. And where we go wrong is we identify with being numb and we identify it as nothingness. But just like you're saying, when you realize, oh, this numbness is a signal, there's a lot here. Let me sit with what's under that, and then all
Mm.
this information emerges. So I'm so glad that still resonates in
Oh,
you.
yeah. We'll get into possibly get into like this new awareness around disassociation that I've
Yeah, I'd love
noticed a
to.
pattern. Yeah. Yeah.
So you lose your job, you're working through that, you're working through being embodied within the numbness and dissociation from losing the job, and then this other event comes into your
Yes.
life.
So the end of June, so June 23rd, I got a call from my sister's best friend that she said, I don't know if you know, but your sister's, she's been sick and we're on our way to the hospital. I was like, what? And I knew that she had been sick. Her and I had been talking and, but the last time I checked in with her, I feel like I'm getting better. And so
What was she sick
I,
with?
so she, at the time we did not know, well, she was sick with COVID. So we knew
Got it.
COVID was playing a role in it. And she was recovering from COVID. And that's when I had checked in with her. She said, I feel like I'm on the outs of it. I'm in the, recovery stage, but her back was hurting extremely
Hmm.
bad. And she had a major headache. And that, in hindsight, now we were able to piece together. Ultimately, she had bacterial meningitis along with the COVID. Um, and so, but we didn't know that at the time.
Hmm.
So they were rushing her to the hospital. She was in an ambulance, and I'm talking through this experience through her best friend. And I'm like,
Hmm.
why can I talk to her? And she's like, no, she's kind of like it was a little bit fuzzy.
Mhm.
And that's important because there was something that I had to process through with that. But I'm like, let me just talk to my sister. If I talk to her, everything will be fine. Like if I can just know. And we were never able to speak physically. She got to the hospital around 2 o'clock and went into a coma at 7 that night, completely unresponsive.
And you're told all this over the phone.
All over the phone.
And how
Yes.
far are you from this place?
So she was in California and I'm in Utah.
Oh,
So
got it. Okay.
yeah, it wasn't, just a jump. And at the time it was like, oh, okay, she's just in the hospital. We'll be talking soon. I
Hmm.
did remember a part of me, so my sister-in-law had mentioned something about bacterial meningitis, and I Googled it because that's, what we do. You go check it out. And I'm like, oh, backache, headache. I completely like dismissed the severity of what bacterial meningitis
Hmm.
is because I've
Hmm.
never been exposed to it, right? Never had
Hmm.
the experience of it. And I was actually at my son's baseball game when all of this news and the compound, like we're just figuring out we don't have answers. So when you're dealing with a traumatic brain injury, they're in complete, like, we're just gonna get
Yeah.
her stable.
Yeah.
We're gonna get her in that space that we can then go for answers.
Yeah. And so what's happening in your body while you're told one moment she's going to the hospital and then the follow-up is she's in a coma? Like, what's happening for you in that moment
So I was
when you
at the
reflect on it?
baseball field and I remember I was actually coach and I'm like, oh, wait, I don't actually have to coach right now. There's other people here. And so I stepped aside and was talking to her friend, like on and off. And then I remember just sitting there and that numbness, that interesting, like
Mm.
now, like that we started that conversation, it was, okay, and I loved how you just explained that because it was this part of me, like all of this charge was happening in my body and I didn't know what to do with it.
Exactly.
And so I just like, I pushed it down and be like, okay, we need to go into figure out mode. Like I essentially took on mom role and
Yeah,
went into figure
absolutely.
this out to, okay, what do we need to do to survive, for her to survive, for all of that.
And just so everyone knows, this is our typical kind of crisis of survival response where there's not enough time to sit in your feelings and to organize or express or even relate to what's happening. We have this idea with embodiment that we're supposed to, in all these really big
Mm.
experiences in life, just be grounded. And sometimes the body doesn't allow you to connect to what you're feeling because it's too much to process in that moment. So then this is why the numbness is such a benevolent gift in these situations because it numbs you so you can function and make phone calls and move and talk and make different decisions that normally you'd be too overwhelmed to make if you felt all the charge and emotion that was under that numbness.
Mm.
So the numbness supported you to move forward and do what you needed to do,
Yeah.
which was what? Well, what did you end up doing?
So that night so when she finally went in the coma, they then had to, protocols and go to the person that can make decisions on her behalf because she didn't have a directive or anything. And so I was on the phone, probably every 5 to 15 minutes, somebody was calling to get permission. We're going to be drilling into her head. We're going to be trying this medication. And thankfully she was at a, a phenomenal hospital that they literally threw the medical book at her of
Hmm.
just making, going through it. But, to get phone calls of all of these things that you've
Hmm.
never, ever, ever like heard these terms before. And I remember just, jotting down notes of like, okay, I've got to
Yeah.
remember everything. Like, how am I to make this decision? And the thing that really supported me in that time is that I I was only making one decision at a time. That when the information was presented, it was making a decision. And there was other people that were involved in the conversation, but I was the one that was directly
Mhm.
communicating with the hospital staff. And it took until probably about 3 a.m. So, from just give time frame from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m., we're getting to her to a space that, okay, she's stable and we're gonna just kind of now at that point of waiting and seeing.
Mhm. And then what happened next?
So once they got her stable, because COVID was involved and at that time, so back 2022 in California, there was still a lot of protocols around visitors and whatnot. And so they told us just kind of stand by where she's stable. There's nothing that can happen. And I just even remember like even saying that word, I'm all, who gets to say what's stable? Like,
Mm-hmm.
here she, like this is not a stable way for my sister. But it was okay. She's fine. She's okay. But we had to wait a couple of days for them to be able to open up and decide that the time that she had got COVID was pretty much out of her system. And so they did open up for visitors to come. And so that was on a Thursday, Saturday morning. I got on a plane and flew to California to go see her.
Mm-hmm.
Oof.
What are you feeling right there when you say that? What happens in your body?
Just the moment of walking into the room. And, her friend had called me when I was at the airport and she said, I don't think you can ever prepare yourself to see what you're going to see. And so I want to give you the option. Do you want to hop on a phone call, video call and just prepare yourself? And so we did that. And still even having the vision of her completely hooked up to everything, to walk into that room. That's what I just felt in my body, of walking into that room and seeing Foley had, obviously like she was intubated and, wires and everything. I mean, my sister was 37 years old, beautiful, healthy, like this wasn't her, right? But to walk in that room and see her in that state. So like I just instantly went there of, oh, we're doing this, is what I remember. We're doing this.
I've been with loved ones in that state. I know that feeling of suddenly seeing them. It's this transformation where they're not there, their body's there, but it's a form of their body you've never even seen before. And it's fascinating. And the way you would expect to be able to relate to them isn't accessible. So there's already this grieving, at least for me in those situations, that set in where there's already a loss of how we connect, how we co-regulate, how we see each other. And so you're walking in, you're seeing that, and then what unfolded?
Yeah, so I was able to be down there with her for 10 days. The first few days, they were still trying to figure out what was the cause of everything. She did have multiple strokes in her brainstem. And, hearing from the doctors that, what is, her, what would be her, oh shoot, what was the term that they use? State, her like living, oh shoot.
It's okay. You
Not,
can use
it's
whatever
okay.
words you want.
Yeah. But they were, just if you, traumatic brain injuries, what we're doing is we're waiting to see what the body's doing, right? She's had the strokes in her brain stems. The brainstem is the control center of the whole body, right? They had her sedated on pain pills or pain medication. So for the first couple of days, we were just in that space of waiting and seeing. No movement at all from her. And I love that you brought in the idea that when you walk in and see your loved one in this state, that you would never imagine them being there, but here they are. It was pretty quickly on that the somatic piece came in, where I can't process this situation in front of me any other way than how I am doing it. Than who I am and how I perceive this. And so the first time we had some time alone, I sat with her and I was like, sis, because she's in a coma. So, I would talk to her this way and I was like, sis, here we are. Okay. You know more than the doctors. You know more than me, anybody here. What is it that you want us to support you? And how do you want me to support you in this time? And, we found out within a couple of days the bacterial meningitis, and I mean they came in with their full hazmat suit, and we're like, we're a little underdressed here in this hospital as they're all fully dressed up, and just found out that was the cause of it, and it's still at that point. It was like we're just going to wait and see to find out what her body, like the damage that was done, and can she ultimately quality of life. That's what I was trying to think of earlier. There, what is the quality of life that your sister would be willing to accept? And I remember sitting in that room and we had, the big family meeting and we're talking to the doctors and they said that. And I was like, what do you mean quality of life? Like my sister was a world traveler. She had just gotten back from Scotland. She had got her MBA in Scotland and her quality of life was living, like truly like to be in that state forever, no, that's not quality of life. And, they said, well, it comes to a point where there is decisions that can be made of, what that means. And so at that time, we're just like, hey, we'll be at that wait and see, and literally allowing her body to do what it needed to do. It was about 5 days that we started seeing some movement in her arms. With the pupils, that's the first place that they check with
Mhm.
what's going on with the brain, and we did start seeing some movements. And I remember like sitting on her bedside, and this is where the somatic piece was really big for me, is that here I'm witnessing her body in a state that I never expected it to be,
Mhm.
and I could hold her physically, like be holding her hand, touching her, and be feeling some like all the things that were going on of like the pressures of decision making,
Mhm.
the anticipatory grief. Like that is the one thing that I never really understood, that of it was a total of 5 weeks of her being in the coma, and then she ultimately passed away. But that anticipating, like, okay, we're seeing movement. Oh, wait, but then quality of life keeps coming up. Like, so
Mhm.
is her movement gonna be, is she wheelchair bound? Like, all of these things that you're
Mhm.
just playing out, like these possible scenarios, and again, not knowing what any of what the potentially the outcome would be.
Hey, my friends. I created a space that is affordable, accessible, and anyone is allowed to join anytime, and it's called the Library Membership. The Library Membership is an online private platform that hosts dozens of my webinars, my somatic practices, private mini lectures, and movement practices. There's also a monthly sound healing, and you'll be invited to a weekly Tuesday live mini practice with me and other participants. You'll also be invited to be a live audience member in our monthly HLN team podcast recordings, where you'll take place in the Q&A that happens off air after the episode is filmed. For more information on this membership, click on the link below, or go to holisticlifenavigation.com and click on membership and then library. You can join right now, and you can cancel or pause your subscription at any time. I look forward to seeing you in there. And what was it like when the outcome was her passing? How did that show up in terms of her body stopped, or she was taken off life support, or what was that like for you to be in that experience?
Yeah, so while she was in the main hospital for 4 of the 5 weeks, and at that time, they were, still like it's like life-saving, right? They're making sure that they do everything to save her life, and then there was conversations that ultimately we can move her to long-term care, and, have a different way of taking care of her. Ultimately, her body actually started shutting down. And this
Mhm.
is I'm actually writing a book of our journey, because there's miracles in these moments.
Mhm.
Death is not something I'm new to. This wasn't my first
Mhm.
experience with death. But I remember having a conversation with her and said, "Sis, you make the choice. And whatever your choice is, I will support you in it. I will support you if you want to stay and we go through this path of rehabilitation, whatever that looks like. I will support you if it's time to go."
Mhm.
And we saw like all of the reactions happening, and I truly believe it was her coming into her body, because there was times where I sit with her and I could feel her physically in
Mhm.
her body,
Mhm.
right? And then there was times where she was out. Um, but I said, I remember sitting with her and I said, "Make your choice. And if possible, can you make it so easy on us so that we don't have to?" I mean, there's always gonna be a little bit of guilt and what ifs and, did I make the right
Mhm.
choices? But I said, can you make it as easy as possible?" And Louise, she did. Like, it she came in, was feeling her arms out, and she never got movement in her legs, and I really, like, truly believe that she was feeling into it, and she's like, "You know what? Screw this. Like, I'm not gonna be wheelchair bound the rest of my life. I'm not,"
Mhm.
and so from that point when we only saw the responses from her upper body, I do believe that she allowed herself to rest. And it was a slow, we started getting word that, different organs weren't working that well. And then, they ultimately moved her to the other facility, which it was insurance driven, because a lot of our medical decisions. I learned through this experience how much insurance drives those medical decisions. Um, but we
I
transferred
want
it
to, I
to
want
an
to, I want to just back up a minute because you said something
yeah.
about it. You felt like she came into her body, and there were these
Mhm.
times when she was unconscious, you could feel her presence there, and then times you couldn't. And I really believe that. I'm thinking of when my first grandmother that passed away, she was also in a coma. And I remember going in to see her and my aunt saying to me, I'm going to leave the room so you have some time alone with her. And I hadn't moved to New York City at this time. They were still in Pennsylvania. So, weeks had gone by since I'd seen her. And I said, Hey, Grandma, I'm here. Just came here to see you. And she woke up out of her coma and turned toward me, and her eyes filled with these watery tears. This big smile came across her face, and she just gazed at me and like opened her mouth but couldn't speak, and then closed her eyes. And that was the last time, she was awake and conscious. But it was this really magical moment of seeing her inhabit her body for 5 or 10 seconds to have this gorgeous kind of like last connection because she had already connected with everyone else before going into her coma, but not me because I had moved away.
Mhm.
We had a really close relationship. And I remember that moment when she was moved into another unit, when she started actively dying, which was a long death. It wasn't
Mhm.
quick, and it was graphic, and it was long. And I remember sitting with her for these days and days and days. It was going by with my family, like 24-hour shifts, it was going in and out. And I could feel her not being there anymore. And it was my deepest introduction to death
Mhm.
because I could feel how she had already left the building of her body, and her body was now going through its own ritual of turning off, essentially. And it felt so peaceful and impersonal and not scary, even though it was so graphic and intense on so many levels. I- It felt so peaceful because she wasn't there. I wasn't watching her suffer to death. She had left the building. I almost
Mhm.
think after she smiled and went back into her coma, you know, okay, I'm gone. I've seen all my family. I'm ready. And I wonder when you look back on the experience, because you were there for weeks, and I remember in the course you writing on the circle space, like, I've been gone for weeks because this happened, and now I'm here to process some of it. I think you did the membership or some kind of ongoing work, something, 'cause I remember you were talking about it. Um, wh- what, what, what did that teach you about death? I'm assuming it's the
Mhm.
closest person you lost and like the most shocking, at this point in your life. Would that be an appropriate assumption or not?
My father passed away, but it wasn't like this.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
imagine. So what did you learn about death? What did it teach you?
I learned that, death truly is not the end. I
How
did
did you
have
learn that though? Like, what did you
yeah.
feel? Tell me, I want to know about that.
Mm.
Because I did too, but what did that for you?
Yeah, so it felt I guess the best way to explain it was the process of her leaving because I did have a day
Hmm.
where I knew 100% that she left. I left
Hmm.
left the building. Um, we were there up until the point that she moved to this new location, and then when we got her there to this new location, seeing her in it, I had some trauma around the building itself and the situation, but watching her body and the peace that she was in,
Mm.
it was this moment, like, I get to finally just rest, guys.
That's
Like,
when she passed already?
not yet, she was still
Oh, not yet.
there. She was
Nice.
still there, and, like, I have pictures of her the most peaceful she looked in this whole
Hmm.
time, that it like, looking back, I'm like, "Okay, that was the time where" like, because here she was in the regular hospital getting checked every hour, doing like, all of that, she had a dedicated nurse, and this facility was a place where she got to rest, she got to
Hmm.
just be, and we had
Hmm.
scheduled a call, with the facility, just do FaceTime because I was back home. It was, July 22nd, um, and we had a call scheduled, and I remember looking at the video, and I'm like, "She's not there." I'm talking to her, and like, there was
Hmm.
nothing because again, her we never saw her eyes besides a
Hmm.
few tweaks, right? Or twitches, but I'm like, "She's not there." And then that night, I was in the shower. This is one of my favorite parts of the story, but I was in the shower and I said, "Jen, just show me where you're at. Just show me." And I closed my eyes and I literally just saw a picture of her and she was smiling, and she said,
Mm,
I'm happy,
mm,
sis. And there was some yellow flowers behind her in the picture. And then within minutes, her friend had texted me and she said, here's a picture of a tattoo that Jen wanted to get, just a conversation. And I was like, it was some flowers. And I'm like, interesting. I
mhm,
just had this vision of Jen in a field of flowers saying she was happy. And she goes, what, like this? And she forwarded me a picture of Jen they had taken with her and these flowers.
mm, mhm,
And a dove came that day. Um, but I knew in that moment that she had left the building.
mhm,
And the doctors were confirming it from the body standpoint. We were losing the brain activity. They were going to do
yeah,
a EEG the following week, and talking to nurse friends and like, you can get second opinions. And I was like, okay, we'll do that. But we planned to go fly back because we knew it was time. And just these, like I said, she made it so we knew. And I felt like, honestly, this conductor that's doing this
mhm,
orchestra, right? And
yeah,
he's like, okay, you play over here, the drums over here. That just the doctors that she orchestrated for us to have, the nurse Peggy, that was just something else. But the most pivotal point for me of realizing this part, that death is not the end, right? So this is something I haven't publicly shared, that we ended up taking her off of life support. And we had it scheduled. We knew it was happening a certain day. And there was things that happened in the hospital, or this place that she was staying, that wasn't allowing us to get into the room.
mm,
And by the time we got into the room, they had already started the process. So when we had walked in, it's just, we're watching the machines and whatnot. And I walked in, and I'm a spiritual person, and I was like, okay, I get to kind of have a little ritual with her, this like closing ceremony, if you want to say. And I walked in, and it was my friend was there, my mom was there, and we were holding hands, and I just started this prayer, and I literally started laughing. I started laughing in this most irreverent, right? This place that you're
mhm,
supposed to be reverent, right? I started laughing, and I was like, sis, you don't need any of this, huh?
mm,
And I
mhm.
literally just had this overwhelming feeling that she just was like, if you need it, Steph, go for it. If
This
you
is
need
for
to
you,
do
not for me.
this,
Yeah.
yeah, but I don't need this. And because I was like, I'm going to unshackle you from your body and all of this. And literally, like, yeah,
I
that's what
love this because there's so many times in my life and with the work I've done with people where the so much of what we do around people's suffering and pain and death is so much for us more than it is for
it
them.
is.
And I love how you're going in there thinking you have to unshackle her where she's already gone.
She's
She's already
gone.
free and
Yeah.
dancing
Yeah.
in the cosmos. Well,
Yeah.
so I'm curious then, this happened, you have this experience, then as you start integrating it, because you joined our practitioner group, one of the slow groups, and you were sharing how this whole experience informed your not just opinion on death, but your desire to work more closely with grief and with death. So how did this propel you into working with people? What did that look like around that? Because you were already a coach at this point.
Yes, I was already coaching, and I ended up naturally sharing my story on my social media, just processing through this grief, realizing how, like, people talk, they don't know how to talk about grief.
Hmm.
We as a society, we don't, let me know if you need anything, but then nobody shows up, so I was just
Hmm.
naturally just sharing the journey of it. And it became this healing part for me to be able to talk about it. And
Hmm.
so in the practitioner group, I had decided that I was going to launch a podcast called Moving Grief. And the whole premise was to move my grief, right? To bring people on, share stories of their loss and um, grief. And I remember in one of the classes, I'm like, grief transformed me to live.
Hmm.
And so at the time, I'm like, okay, I can shift my coaching to be in that space of grief and supporting people in grief, because it was just natural for me to talk about
Hmm.
it. And it was
Yeah.
so, obviously it was a daily thing, and it still is 2 years later, of like, there's not a day, a moment that goes by that she's not a part of my experience, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I started this podcast and was doing some things, and then through the practitioner group, like meeting every month and just being in that space, and the beautiful questions you had and the practices that we'd go through. I remember you made a post about how grief keeps us connected to our loved ones. And I literally was like, fuck you, Luis. No, that's not true. And I was walking, and I remember saying, it was the first time I saw something of yours that I was like, He doesn't know what he's talking about. That's not my experience. Okay, thanks. Next. And I was walking and I was like, wait, because I love curiosity. That's how I live my life. I'm like, wait a minute. Is this grief the connection that's holding me to her?
Mm,
So I started talking to her, which I do a lot. And I was like, sis, is this? And I just literally started bawling. And I remembered one of our last conversations we had. She lived with me for a few months before moving back to California. And she was like asking me what I do with people and, telling them
mhm,
all the yada yada. And she's like, so you're a coach? And I'm like, nope, I'm not a coach. I denied that term. I didn't want to be called a coach.
mhm,
And so she's like, okay, just explain to me again what you do. And she's like, Stephanie, you're a fucking coach. Just own it.
mhm,
And I literally remembered that, like everything, and my whole body lit up. And I'm like, you're a coach.
mm,
And the grief piece informs your work, but it doesn't have to be everything.
mhm, mhm,
It doesn't have to be all of it. And I just remember, like, literally, I was like, so I can honor you more by actually inspiring people to live and inspiring them to move through their grief,
mhm.
to allow their grief to be a part of their experience, to feel it when it comes through. But what if I can actually support people in living and embracing life? Because if I truly believe that death is not the end, then why would this experience end my living?
That's right. That's right. I really appreciate that because I find that when we allow death to really work its way through us, it does just that. It manifests how amazing life is. And for me, I feel even more alive, when I experience and relate to death. When I'm avoiding death, when I'm pushing it away, when I'm judging it, when I'm saying it shouldn't have happened, I'm arguing with it. But when I see it for what it is, it creates this incredible gratitude for being alive and even this preciousness of especially in this case when it's so shocking, when it's someone who's elderly or they're sick for a while, you're kind of preparing. When it's so sudden, there was no preparation. And that's the beauty of life is it's all impersonal. There's no preparation. It comes when it comes. And how do I relate to it when it comes?
Mm.
And so I guess I wonder, we have a little time left. What's it like when you feel, imagine, I should say, because it's interesting that you found this. It's amazing for me to talk with people that do the course because there are so many people that do it. I don't know what they're going through individually, unless, a couple of them share it. And it's amazing to think that you find this thing right when you need to find it. And I wonder for you, what is it like to live like post loss and grief with somatic embodiment? What's it like to have that skill set and move with, like you call it moving grief, move with it? What does that even mean for you?
It means that I get to feel it all. With my dad passed away in 2014, and I didn't realize it at the time how much I disassociated and didn't want to feel life just goes on, right? Dad was older, but it still was unexpected. We had 9 weeks with him when we knew he had cancer, but I disassociated and didn't want to feel it. And now feeling not only her death and the loss, but now feeling like the living that comes from it,
Hmm.
that knowing that at any given moment our life can change, right?
Hmm.
That our life, like nothing is promised. And
Hmm.
the one thing that we all share in common is death, right? That we will all experience death. And
Yeah.
yet it's still so hard for a lot of people to talk about, or like you said, like if you want to pull away from it, you're actually not gonna receive, like, for me, living somatically and being, I'm so grateful that it was there for me when I went through this, the actual traumatic event, to be present with it, right? And then the aftermath of it, in that I get to feel it all. I get to feel the
Hmm.
tenderness. When the conflict in the Middle East broke out, and I'm like, holy shit, I did not realize any of this stuff was going on. I've been numb to all of this, that I actually get
Hmm.
to feel the tenderness. And,
Hmm.
Jen was my person in my life that would be like, Stephanie, wake up. Like,
Hmm.
not everything is sunshine and rainbows. Like, people are
Hmm.
hurting, people are suffering. Like, wake up. And I remember having this moment. I'm like, I can't call my sister to ask her. And I'm like, okay, well, then feel what this tenderness is. Feel what
Hmm.
40 years has been like, where you got to ignore things outside of yourself. And like this tenderness piece, I know I've said it a few times, like it's been really, really big for me in like her death showed me truly what loving is,
Mhm.
and that we can connect. 'Cause I remember I had parts of me would be like, "Oh, I don't wanna sit with people and their shit because that means that I'm gonna take it on," right?
Yeah,
That bypassing crap, and I realized that I'm like, "No, I'll sit with you. I can be there with you. I don't have to take it on, but I can be with
that's
you, and
right.
I won't walk away stinking," right? I won't
Yeah.
walk away, but I can be with you because yeah, things life sucks sometimes.
Well, I find what you're saying, I find it liberating of feeling it all. It's very liberating because if there's a feeling I don't want to experience,
Mm,
I'm shackled by the fear of when that feeling might enter my body or when I might be confronted with someone else's body who feels it and I don't have space for it. But when I can feel everything and
mhm,
feeling everything and witnessing everything and empathizing is very different from being flooded by it. Like you said, it's very different from being completely hijacked by someone else's experience. I can feel you as you talk about your sister, and I can feel my seat and know it's not my experience, it's yours. And it's a beautiful pendulation to somatically empathize with you and return to my reality so I don't get lost in your experience because I
yeah,
do no service to anyone when I get lost in their experience. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about your sister and your experience and how somatics guided you through it and continue to. And I'll put information in the episode details for people to reach out to you and to find your work. Anyone that's trying to navigate grief or loss and wants to move with it and wants it to enliven them might want to reach out to you and play with you.
yeah, thank you.
That's the end of today's episode. Now let's take a moment to notice where we feel the episode in our bodies. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let whatever wants to come up, come up. And remember, those sensations hold the wisdom that we're looking for. If you want to go deeper, visit holisticlifenavigation.com.